In this video, I'm going to discuss conversational tips so you can stop being awkward in conversations and you can start walking away from them with new friends and just a good energy as well. I'm going to start with talking about some mistakes that people are making, a little bit of philosophy about conversations and what a good conversation means, and then I'm going to end the video with some practical tips, my favorite tips for conversations. Hey, my name's Grayson. If you haven't been here before, I make videos on social skills and psychology as well. I learned most of my stuff on psychology from traveling to over 40 countries solo, but I also have a master's from the University of Cambridge in public health, and I'm happy you're here. So subscribe if that sounds like content that you'd like. To start, do you know what the number one thing is why conversations suck a lot of the time? It's typically because one person is trying a little bit too hard. And that might have been you in the past. As soon as someone picks up on you trying way too hard in a conversation with them, they're just going to want to run away from the conversation because it's just a very needy energy. So you want to put effort in, but not too much in the sense of asking too many questions, getting too close to them too quickly, and forcing a conversation when someone actually just wants to leave. And so part of mastering the art of conversation is be able to pick up on these cues and then creating a little bit of space for the other person to come towards you. Although this might sound counterintuitive and not what you've heard everywhere with conversation starters and things like that, good conversations have less to do with what you're actually saying and more to do with where you're putting your attention and how comfortable the other person feels around you. You want the person to walk away from the conversation feeling two things. One, that they're more relaxed and they're comfortable after the exchange. And two, like they just got heard by a person, that you were really, really listening to them. If you can have that in conversations, all of your conversations are going to be really good. It's not about looking really interesting. It's not about saying a cool punchline that's going to make them all happy. It's about those two simple things: comfort and having them feel like they were heard. All right, so tip number one is to be interested, not interesting. This comes from How to Win Friends and Influence People, a fantastic book. And a mistake people make in conversations is they think that to have a good conversation with someone, that you have to be the most interesting person and talk about all your cool hobbies and cool things you're doing later. But actually, if you do too much of that, the other person's just going to feel overwhelmed, think you're kind of self-centered and a narcissist and things like that. The way easier approach is to actually just be interested in the other person. So what does that look like? It means asking questions, open-ended questions towards them about their hobby or their day and things like that. And to keep following up with questions about the thing that they just said. One trap to avoid when you're doing this, and that sometimes I have conversations with people that do this, is you keep asking too many questions and it feels forced and ends up feeling like an interview with the other person. You also don't want that. So you ask a few questions, show a lot of interest, and then share a little bit about yourself related to that interest in order to build that sort of trust and connection with them. Another way to avoid asking too many questions when you're trying to be interested in someone is to say some statements instead. Let's say you're talking about skiing with the other person, right? And then, you're asking some questions about how much they ski and where they ski and all this type of stuff. You can eventually say something like, I'm surprised. I thought you would have been someone who loves the beach. Making a statement like that instead of a question will have them be like, wow, why did they think I'd be like that? And then they'll be intrigued and ask you, why did you think that I was someone that would like the beach? Using statements like this, guesses about their personality, opens up a way more interesting conversation instead of just having questions. The second tip, and related to this, is something that's not talked about that much at all. And it's related to what I said about you want the other person to be comfortable. So as you're talking with the other person, don't just be in your head thinking about what they're saying or thinking about what you're going to say next. Try to just relax and focus on their body language as well. Focus on what direction are their feet pointed? What direction is their body facing? Are they looking around the room? What you're trying to pick up on with all of these cues is, do they actually want to be there? Are they relaxed? Are they focusing on something else? If you can pick up on something in their body language, for instance, let's say if you're at a party and they're looking around the party and they keep looking in one direction, if you can then point out that you notice that they've been looking in that direction, that will be such a powerful way to connect with the other person. And they'll be amazed that you noticed that. It'll also make them more present, because if they're focused on something else and you're trying to connect with them and have a conversation, there's no way you're going to be able to pull them away from that thing. So you could say something like, "Oh man, there must be something really interesting over there. I've noticed you've been looking over there." And they might say, "Oh no, it's my ex or something. I just keep thinking about them." All of a sudden, you can have a conversation about their ex, and that's the conversation that they actually wanted to have. Or if they look like they want to leave, they're checking their watch, they're kind of antsy, they're facing the door with their body, let's say, you can say something like, "Well, listen, I've really enjoyed chatting with you. I don't want to take too much of your time. It seems like you might want to be needing to get somewhere." And when you say that, they'll really appreciate it. And half the time they'll say, "Oh, I really appreciate that. Let's follow up and have a conversation later." Or actually saying that to them will have them relax more into the conversation with you. Tip number 3, let silence be your tool. One mistake that so many people make in conversations is they try to fill every single gap in the conversation. They think that their conversation's failing if there's any sort of silences. But the opposite is actually true. If you can be comfortable with the silences with the person and just kind of embrace them, the person will be actually amazed that you're so comfortable with the silences. And they'll either end up saying something, or it gives them actually an opportunity to think or expand on what they were just saying. When you keep filling in the awkward silences, the problem is that your conversation will jump around too much. Sometimes the person actually needs a little bit of time to process and then add a little bit more. So if you ask them a question and then they answer, you can pause a little bit after their answer to give them a little bit more space to think about maybe adding more. If you jump in right away and respond to something that they said, it just makes the conversation really frantic and jumping around too much. Having those pauses is actually completely fine. And often in after those pauses, if there's nothing that needs to be said, you can just completely shift the conversation to something else. Tip number 4 will help you stand out from pretty much 95% of people in conversations. Most conversations are hella boring and they end because the person you're having the conversation with has had the same conversation a million times. And that's because the conversation's kind of literal. People ask questions like, "Oh, so what do you do for work? Oh, how long have you been there?" And a lot of the answers to those questions are really literal, and the person has answered a million times. So this tip is to avoid the literal trap. You can ask some of those questions if you need to, but it's far more interesting to have conversations that aren't so literal. So instead of asking, "Oh, what do you currently do for work? How long have you been there?" You can say something like, you know, what would be your dream job if you could start today? It's a question that they rarely get asked that will actually have them stop and think for a second. And it will bring out that creative side of them that's very hypothetical. The other benefit of this is you'll actually learn more about their personality, because often people are in jobs that they hate, right? That's really common. People actually don't want to talk about their job. They want to talk about their ideals, right? It's very rare that you have a conversation with someone and they're actually already in their dream job. If you can get them talking about their passions and something they're really into, they're going to absolutely love you. And you'll also just have more interesting conversations. So ask more hypothetical questions instead of keeping it so literal. Tip number 5 is one of my personal favorites. A couple mistakes that people make, and they aren't necessarily horrible mistakes, but they can lead to conversations feeling kind of stale and not sparky and kind of magical. And it's because you're focusing too much on the past and the future with the person, right? So a lot of conversations you're talking about things you used to do in the past, or you might be asking them, oh, like, what are you getting up to this summer? Things like that. And that's great. But one of the best ways to make someone feel really comfortable and actually to get to know them is to keep it really, really narrow and more present. So, really understanding, for instance, their daily habits or what they were actually doing today. Or another really great one is to keep a conversation literally present with things around you, right? So you can do that, especially when you're meeting someone for the first time or talking to a stranger. One of the best things you can do is just stand beside them and make a comment about the surrounding. You can say, oh, wow, aren't there such beautiful cars in this area? Or isn't that tree just like so amazing, right? Something that puts them really, really present will actually make them more comfortable. And it's also just a really easy thing to talk about. So, talking about your surroundings. Another way to learn more about their daily habits, which is something that they're thinking about more often than the past or the future a lot of the time, is to use what's called the reverse interview. So instead of doing interview style where it's like, what are you doing next week, or what are you doing for your job, which is kind of more in the past, you can say something like, what's something you do every morning that you love doing, or what's something that you do every day that's like your favorite part of the day. You can learn a lot more about someone's personality and their true interests by asking questions like this about what they do on a daily basis. Then you can share something about yourself as well that's maybe quirky or different that you do in your daily life as well. And that's a really good way to build rapport with the person and make them feel more comfortable. All right, the last tip is for when you're approaching someone new, a stranger, someone you want to talk to at a party, or something like that. It's a simple technique, but one of the most powerful for putting the person into a really good frame with you before the conversation. It's called the compliment question combo. So when you go up to someone, and it has to be genuine or else it won't work. When you go up to someone, find something unique about them that you like, okay? And then compliment that. Make sure it's not something that's too flirty or sexual, because that's bad. And two, make sure it's not too generic as well. So don't just say, oh, wow, your shirt's cool. Try to say something really specific about it, like, oh, I like the length of that shirt. That's really interesting. So make a compliment like that and then follow it up with a question, because people will always receive compliments quite well. It's a really easy way to open. So you can say, for instance, I went up to someone the other day and you can say, oh man, I love your tattoo. That's amazing. Where did you get it done? Or did you get them all done at once? That will open up the conversation and they'll just start talking a whole bunch because they'll feel really good because you just validated something about them. And then they'll get to tell a story about their lives or one of their passions or something that they're into. And then what you can do is you can continue to ask questions about that, about their passion, all this type of stuff. And then eventually share something about yourself related to that passion as well. And before you know it, they'll walk away from that conversation being like, wow, that person is just so perceptive, curious, interesting, and you'll just have had an amazing conversation with that person. All right, thanks for watching the video, guys. If you enjoyed that, make sure you subscribe below. I also offer one-on-one coaching if you want to improve your social skills in a more one-on-one way. And I hope to see you next time.